His name was Dr. Eli Marsh. He had spent 30 years studying the ocean. He had written papers no one read. He had applied for grants that were denied. He had watched other scientists win awards for work he had quietly made possible. He did not mind. The ocean did not care about awards. And Eli did not care about much that the ocean did not care about. He was 53 years old when he finally got his chance. The submersible was called Lumen. It was not a government vessel. It was not backed by a university or a defense contractor or a billionaire with a media presence. It had been built in a converted fishing warehouse in Aberdeen, Scotland, by a small team of engineers who worked mostly in silence and argued only about coffee. The whole project had cost $4 million. That was, in oceanographic terms, almost nothing. The hull was titanium. The viewport was borosilicate glass, 8 inches thick, ground to tolerances measured in microns. The life support would hold for 72 hours. Eli had contributed his own savings. $40,000. Everything he had outside of his pension. He did not tell his daughter until after the vessel was already built. She was not happy. He was not surprised. They departed from Guam on a Tuesday. The support ship was a repurposed research trawler named the Patience, which Eli thought was a good name for any vessel involved in deep-sea work. The crew was 7 people. The dive team was 2, Eli and his pilot, a woman named Suki Tanaka, who had logged more hours in deep submersibles than almost anyone alive, and spoke in a low, measured cadence that Eli had always found calming. She had flown commercial planes before she flew submarines. She had worked for Jamstack in Japan before she went independent. She wore her hair in a single braid and kept a small clay figurine of a whale on the console that she touched. Briefly, at the start of every dive. Eli never asked about it. Some things did not need explaining. They descended at dawn. The surface of the Pacific was flat and pale that morning. Barely a ripple. Eli climbed into Lumen through the top hatch, lowered himself into the co-pilot seat, and buckled the harness with the slow deliberateness of a man who wanted to remember the feeling. Suki sealed the hatch above them. The support crew winched them over the side. There was a gentle knock of hull against wave, and then the world tilted slightly. And then they were in the water. Eli watched through the viewport as the surface light rose above him in a slow gold shimmer. Then it began to fade. The Mariana Trench is the deepest place on Earth. It runs roughly 1,500 miles through the western Pacific, curving like a scar in the ocean floor. At its deepest point, the Challenger Deep, the seafloor sits nearly 36,000 feet below the surface. The pressure there is more than 8 tons per square inch. It is a place where mountains would be swallowed without trace. A place where the silence has never been interrupted by anything living that carries sound. Most of what lives in that trench has never been seen. Eli had spent 30 years believing that the ocean floor was not dead, not barren, but full of things that had simply never been looked at properly, full of organisms adapted to cold and dark and pressure beyond imagining, full of chemistry that might have implications for medicine, for material science, for the fundamental understanding of how life sustains itself at its most extreme. He had written about it, argued about it, dreamed about it. Now he was going. The light was the first thing. Eli always told students this. People imagine the deep ocean as pitch black, a void, nothing. And below a certain depth, below the mesopelagic zone, below what oceanographers call the midnight zone, there is no sunlight. That part is true. But darkness is not the same as lightlessness. At 200 meters, the blue-green daylight from above had faded to a cold, dim suggestion, like the memory of afternoon. Suki leveled their descent, and they drifted in that color for a moment, just watching. Small organisms drifted past the viewport, copepods, a chain of salps, a single translucent medusa trailing filaments like silk thread, pulsing with a faint internal blue. Eli wrote the depth in his notebook. He still used a paper notebook. He had been teased about this for years. He did not care. By 500 meters, the daylight was gone. Suki clicked off the exterior floodlights, and they sat in complete darkness for 60 seconds. This was something she did on every deep dive. Not a procedure, a ritual, a way of letting the eyes and the mind adjust to the reality of where they were. In the dark, things appeared. Not imagined things, real things. A slow pulse of green, far off to the left. A scatter of blue sparks rising from something below. A long, cold ribbon of red light that crossed the viewport from right to left and was gone before Eli could identify the animal that made it. Bioluminescence. Living light. The ocean, in the absence of the sun, had invented its own. Eli pressed his hand flat against the cold glass of the viewport and watched. At 1,000 meters, the dragonfish found them. It came from below, a small creature, no longer than Eli's forearm, but carrying within its body one of the most sophisticated light-producing organs in the natural world. Along its belly ran a row of photophores, each one a discrete light organ capable of producing blue-green flashes in precise sequence. Along its jaw was a single barbel, a long filament tipped with a bioluminescent lure that it held out in front of itself, like a lantern on a long arm. The fish hovered at the edge of the floodlight range, watching them. Suki killed the floods again. In the dark, the dragonfish lit up. The photophores along its belly began their sequence. A slow pulse, building, then faster, then something that looked almost like language. A pattern, a rhythm. Eli had read about dragonfish bioluminescence. He had seen video footage, but footage taken by robotic cameras and projected onto a laptop screen at sea level is not the same thing as sitting 4 inches of glass away from a living creature that is producing cold fire in the dark. He did not write in his notebook. He only watched. The dragonfish led them deeper. This was not rational. Eli knew this. Fish do not lead submersibles. Animals move toward or away from stimuli. They do not make decisions about where to direct human scientists. He knew this, and yet the fish descended. And Suki followed. and Eli did not ask her to stop. At 2,000 meters, they passed through a layer of marine snow, a slow, continuous fall of organic particles drifting down from the surface world, the shed skins and waste and dead cells of everything that lived above. It moved through the floodlight beam like a blizzard in slow motion, each particle catching the light briefly before falling on. It was one of the most beautiful things Eli had ever seen, and he had seen it before on instruments, in data, in second-hand descriptions. And none of that had prepared him for the reality of it. The dragonfish moved through it without disturbing a single flake. At 4,000 meters, the ridge walls appeared. The Mariana Trench is not a flat-floored canyon. It is a complex geological structure, full of ridges and overhangs and hydrothermal features, and collapsed sections that create microenvironments unlike anything on the surface world. As Lumen descended toward the trench floor, the walls became visible on either side. Pale basalt, encrusted with microbial mats, overhung with formations that had no names, because no one had ever been close enough to name them. Suki guided them through a narrow passage between two ridge faces. The dragonfish had gone. But there was something ahead. Eli saw it before the instruments registered it. A glow. Not a pulse. Not the brief flash of a photophore, or the sweep of a lure. A sustained, steady glow coming from the seafloor, approximately 40 meters below them. A pale blue-green that lit the water around it in a diffuse halo, as if something down there were breathing light. "You seeing this?" Suki said. "Yes," Eli said. She leveled their descent, and they hung there for a moment, looking down. "Hydrothermal," she said. "Maybe," he said, "but the temperature's not spiking." She looked at the instrument. "No, it's not." They descended. The source was a colony. That was the only word for it. Spread across approximately 60 square meters of seafloor was an organism, or a consortium of organisms. It was impossible to say which without samples, that Eli had never seen, never read about, and could not immediately classify. It had the gross morphology of a mat-forming organism, but within it were structures that rose several centimeters from the substrate, translucent and branching, each branch tipped with a light-producing organ that pulsed in slow, wave-like coordination across the entire colony. When one end pulsed, the wave traveled across the surface at roughly 15 centimeters per second. The whole colony breathed in light. Eli's hands were shaking. He became aware of this, noted it, and set his pen down so it would not affect his writing. He spent 40 minutes photographing and sampling. Suki held Lumen at 3 meters altitude above the colony, while Eli operated the collection arm, a hydraulic manipulator mounted below the viewport, with a steadiness that surprised him. He gathered 4 sediment cores from the perimeter. He gathered 2 tissue samples from structures at the colony edge, using a gentle suction device designed not to crush what it collected. He took 2,400 photographs. He logged temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and pH at intervals of 30 seconds. He was aware, the whole time, that he was looking at something no human being had ever seen. He found this thought calming, not exciting, not overwhelming, calming. This was the ocean's oldest habit, existing, fully and completely, with or without anyone to observe it. On the ascent, Suki spoke. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know," Eli said. "Guess." He thought for a long moment. The light output is too consistent for standard bioluminescence. The coordination across the colony surface suggests some form of signaling, chemical or electrical, maybe both. The branched structures might be reproductive organs, or they might be sensory organs, or both. He paused. There's a class of deep-sea organism called xenophyrophores, giant single-celled organisms, the largest cells on Earth. But this isn't that. Or it's not only that. Another pause. I think it might be doing something with the chemosynthetic bacteria in the sediment, processing them, using their metabolic output to generate light. Why would it do that? I don't know yet. Suki nodded, watching the pressure gauge climb down as they ascended. Seems like a good kind of not knowing. Yes, Eli said. It is. The samples went to 3 independent labs. Eli had arranged this in advance, deliberately. He did not want a single institution controlling the analysis. He sent portions to a marine biology lab at the University of Hawaii, to a biochemistry group in Kiel, Germany, who specialized in deep-sea metabolic pathways, and to a small private lab in Vancouver, run by a former student of his who had gone into pharmaceutical research and who Eli trusted completely. He did not expect results quickly. He had been in science long enough to know that the work that matters does not come quickly. He was wrong. The Kiel group called him 6 weeks later. They had isolated a compound in the light-producing tissue, a luciferase variant, unlike anything in the existing literature. Luciferases are the enzymes that produce bioluminescence. There are dozens of known variants, each chemically distinct. This one was different from all of them in a specific way. Its light-producing reaction generated no heat. 0 thermal output, pure light. The applications were immediate and enormous. Medical imaging, surgical lighting in environments where heat is dangerous, optical data transmission. The compound would need years of study before it could be synthesized, replicated, applied. But the principle was established. The mechanism was real. And the patent, filed jointly by the Kiel Group and Eli's team, was among the first. The Vancouver lab found something else, a secondary compound in the mat tissue, one that, when applied to certain types of cancer cells in vitro, interrupted their replication cycle, not destroyed them, interrupted them, slowed their division rate by approximately 70% over a 36-hour window. This was a very long way from a cancer treatment. Eli said this repeatedly to everyone who asked. But it was also not nothing. The funding that came after was unlike anything Eli had experienced. A pharmaceutical company in Basel offered to fund a second expedition at 20 times the budget of the first. A defense research agency expressed interest in the no-heat light compound. 3 universities offered him endowed chairs. His daughter, who had not been happy when he told her about the first dive, called him on a Tuesday night and said she was proud of him. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after she said that. He was not a man who cried easily. He did not cry then. But it was close. The second expedition was larger. 2 submersibles, a dedicated support ship, a team of 12 scientists from 6 countries, a full documentary film crew, which Eli had agreed to as a condition of one of the funding agreements, and which he found largely tolerable once he established that the cameras would not be permitted inside Lumen during any active dive. They returned to the Mariana Trench in the spring. The colony was still there. If anything, it had grown. The documentary aired the following autumn. Eli watched it once, at home, with a glass of scotch and the lights off. The footage was remarkable. Even he had to admit that. The cinematographer had found angles and framings that Eli himself had not thought of. Ways of showing the scale of the colony and the structure of its light patterns that were genuinely revelatory. There was a sequence near the end, 4 minutes of uninterrupted footage, no narration, no music, of the colony pulsing in the dark. Just the light, just the rhythm. Eli had asked for that. The no narration part. The filmmaker had almost said no. Eli had been very quiet and very firm. He had gotten what he wanted. He went back a 3rd time. Alone with Suki, in Lumen, with a fraction of the budget and none of the cameras. They descended on a clear morning in June, when the Pacific was so flat and quiet that the dive felt like lowering yourself slowly through glass. They passed through the daylight zone, through the twilight, into the midnight. The marine snow fell. The dragonfish appeared again, a different one probably, though Eli had come to feel it was the same, and pulsed its slow blue-green sequence along the viewport, and moved on. At the colony, Suki killed the exterior lights. They sat in the dark, and the colony breathed below them, and the light moved across it in its slow travelling wave. And Eli rested his head back against the seat padding and let his eyes stay open, and did not write anything down. He was here. That was enough. That had always been enough. Later, ascending, Suki asked him what he was thinking. He considered the question for a long time. "I'm thinking about how it doesn't need us," he said. "It was doing this before any human being ever came down here. It will be doing this after. The light doesn't care that we found it. It just keeps moving." Suki was quiet. "I find that comforting," he said. "Me too," she said. He retired 4 years later. Not from the work continued through his students and his collaborators and the ongoing research programs his expeditions had seeded, but from the demands, the committees, the speaking engagements, the slow erosion of actual thinking that comes with institutional success. He moved to a small house on the Oregon coast. He kept a paper notebook. He walked the beach in the mornings, in the grey light before sunrise, when the tide was low and the tide pools were full, and every small creature in them was doing exactly what it had evolved over millions of years to do, quietly and completely, with no requirement for any audience at all. He thought about the colony sometimes, the slow pulse of it, the cold travelling wave. He had brought a piece of it up with him, in a sample tube, preserved in formalin. He kept it on his desk. It looked preserved, like a piece of pale coral or a dried flower. But he remembered how it looked alive. He would always remember that. A galaxy below the world, breathing, patient, still there in the dark, illuminating everything. Sleep well. The ocean doesn't stop while you rest. It just keeps moving, slow and full of light, deeper than any worry you're carrying tonight.